There is a part of your brain, roughly the size of your fist, sitting right behind your forehead. Its only job is to stop you from saying the thing you shouldn't say, from looking at what you shouldn't look at, from doing what you will regret in an hour, in a day, in 10 years. Neuroscience calls this region the prefrontal cortex. The Qur'an calls its function by another name. It calls it modesty. And by the end of this video, you are going to see that these are not two different things described by two different traditions. They are the same system. One studied under a microscope, the other revealed 14 centuries ago. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Kun Fayakun Speaks. Modesty is not weakness. It is not passivity. Modesty is a command and control system. It is the part of you that catches a thought, an urge, a glance, before it turns into an action you can't take back. That is not a poetic metaphor. That is almost word for word the textbook definition neuroscientists give for the prefrontal cortex. So today, we're going to build a bridge between the two. And along the way, you'll walk away with a practical, science-backed method for actually strengthening your modesty, not just feeling guilty about losing it. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that modesty is a branch of Iman, of faith itself, not an accessory to faith, a branch of it, something growing directly out of the same root. Scholars describe modesty as an inner restraint, a sense that activates the moment you are about to cross a line, whether anyone is watching or not. It governs the eyes. It governs the tongue. It governs how you carry yourself in rooms where no one would ever know what you did. Notice what's being described here. A restraint system that operates even in private, even under temptation, even when the immediate reward is right there in front of you. Hold that thought. We're about to meet its neurological twin. Right behind your forehead sits the prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the human brain and the slowest to fully mature. It doesn't finish developing until your mid-20s. Its job, in plain terms, is executive function. Planning, weighing consequences, delaying gratification, and critically, inhibiting impulses generated elsewhere in the brain. Because deeper inside your skull sits another structure, the limbic system, including the amygdala, which handles raw emotional reaction and reward seeking. When you see something tempting, a notification, an image, a cutting remark you want to fire back, that's the limbic system firing first, fast and automatic. The prefrontal cortex is the brake pedal. It receives that signal a fraction of a second later and asks one question. Should I actually act on this? People with strong prefrontal regulation pause before reacting. People with weakened regulation through chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or repeated exposure to instant gratification habits like endless scrolling find that brake pedal getting weaker and weaker. The impulse wins faster. The restraint shows up later, if at all. Usually as regret. Sound familiar? It should, because what we just described in clinical language is precisely what happens when a person loses their modesty. Not in one dramatic moment, but gradually. One unchecked glance and one unchecked scroll at a time. Here is the claim at the center of this video. Modesty is not simply an ethical value. It is a trained neurological reflex, and the prefrontal cortex is the organ that carries it out. Every single time you lower your gaze instead of letting it linger, you are not performing an abstract ritual of piety. You are firing a real circuit. Prefrontal cortex overriding limbic impulse in real time in your actual brain. Every time you hold your tongue instead of saying the harsh thing, same circuit. Every time you close the app instead of doom scrolling for another 40 minutes, same circuit. And here is the part that should genuinely excite you. Neuroscience confirms that this circuit behaves like a trainable skill, not a fixed trait. The technical term researchers use is neuroplasticity. Use is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to physically rewire itself based on repeated behavior. Practice restraint consistently, and the prefrontal pathways associated with self-regulation strengthen. Practice indulgence consistently, and the limbic shortcuts strengthen instead, while the brake pedal atrophies from disuse. In other words, every act of modesty is a literal rep. A rep for a muscle you cannot see, but one that determines almost everything about the kind of person you become. This is exactly why the Qur'an's instruction on lowering the gaze comes before almost any other social command in Surah An-Nur. Guarding the eyes isn't a minor side rule about modesty. It's an intervention at the very first checkpoint where temptation enters the nervous system. The eyes are the fastest route to the limbic system. A single glance can trigger a cascade of dopamine and craving before the prefrontal cortex even gets a vote. So the instruction to lower the gaze is, in effect, a command to strengthen the brake pedal at the earliest possible point, before the impulse has momentum. This is also why classical scholars describe modesty as a protective garment, a covering for the self. A garment doesn't just hide, it regulates exposure. And regulated exposure is precisely what protects a developing prefrontal system from being overwhelmed by constant limbic triggering. 1,400 years before fMRI scanners existed, this guidance was already targeting the correct mechanism. So how do you actually strengthen this? 3 concrete practices, each mapped to what we just covered. First, the 3-second pause. Before any impulsive glance, reply, or scroll, insert a deliberate 3-second delay. That gap is exactly the window the prefrontal cortex needs to override the limbic signal. 3 seconds, repeated daily, is how the circuit gets reps. Second, pre-commitment. Decide your boundaries before you're in the moment of temptation, not during it. Once the limbic system has already fired, the prefrontal cortex is fighting uphill. Pre-deciding what you will and won't look at, say, or scroll through shifts the battle to a point where you have the advantage. Third, protect the inputs that fuel prefrontal strength. Sleep deprivation measurably weakens prefrontal regulation. So does chronic stress and excessive screen-driven dopamine spikes. Praying on time, maintaining wudu, regular dhikr, and sufficient sleep are not separate from this discipline. They are the physiological foundation that keeps the brake pedal functional in the first place. So the next time you lower your gaze, hold your tongue, or close an app you know you shouldn't be on, understand what you are actually doing. You are not suppressing yourself. You are not being weak. You are exercising the single most advanced structure in the human brain, in exact alignment with a command revealed long before that structure had a name. Modesty was never about restriction for its own sake. It was always about training the part of you capable of choosing who you become, one disciplined moment at a time. If this perspective shifted something in you, stay with this series. We're going deeper into the science of self-control through an Islamic lens in the next video. Until then, guard the gaze, train the brake pedal, and let your modesty be your strength.